Exceptional Marcus Pearce.
Rockstar Damien Christoph.
The Wellness Summit is almost upon us, and we have so many prizes and giveaways before the summit even begins this year, MP.
That's right, Damo. There's a very exciting Facebook giveaway running this week only over at the Wellness Couch. One of our new exhibitors at this year's summit is Solid Technics cast iron and beautiful non-stick cookware, and they are giving away over $400 in prizes to one lucky Wellness Couch listener.
All you need to do is go to the Wellness Couch's Facebook page and follow the prompts. The lucky winner will also receive a double pass to this year's Wellness Summit, September 10-11 at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. How cool is that?
So go check out the Wellness Couch on Facebook to enter, and remember to immerse yourself in 16 hours of powerhouse wellness with Damo, myself, and over 40 other health and wellness experts. Go to thewellnesssummit.com and enter the code SOLIDSUMMIT for $100 off your ticket before they sell out.
That's thewellnesssummit.com.
TheWellnessCouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. This is Up for a Chat with Cyndi O'Mara, Karen Smith, and Kim Morrison.
Today I have Dr. Pam Peeke on the line, and Dr. Peeke is an internationally renowned physician, scientist, and expert in the fields of nutrition, metabolism, stress, and fitness. She is a widely acclaimed women's health expert and co-host of the popular HER or Hearst radio show. It's an American show on iHeart and Radio MD. Dr. Peeke is a Pew Foundation Scholar in Nutrition and Metabolism, Assistant Professor of Medicine at the University of Maryland, and Fellow of the American College of Physicians. And Dr. Peeke is the New York Times bestseller author of Fight Fat After 40 and Body for Life for Women. Her latest book, The Hunger Fix, which is the 3-stage detox and recovery plan for overeating and food addiction, is what we'll be talking about today. It has become a New York best-selling list, and Dr. Peeke is also a regular in-studio medical commentator for the national networks, including being on the Dr. Oz show, and is also a monthly columnist and contributor, editor for numerous national magazines, including ones we see in Australia, which is Prevention, Women's Health, and Fitness. Dr. Peeke is also the founder of the Peeke Performance Centre for Healthy Living, including her Peeke Week retreats. I love that. I think that is just wonderful, the Peeke Week retreats, and lifestyle management program. Welcome, Dr. Peeke.
Oh, I'm so happy to be on with you. It's going to be a lot of fun, and kudos to you and your team for, giving a shout out and networking with thought leaders from around the globe. So this is all good.
Well, I see you as a thought leader because, I've listened to you and read your information, and, food addiction is something, and that's what I'd really like to concentrate on, if that's okay. Because food addiction is something that is real. Yeah. Look, it's a real thing, and it's happening. So can we start with, how did you get into food addiction?
Well, I have been a scientist and a physician for years in the field of nutrition, and have done research at the National Institutes of Health as well. And one of the things that was always strange, Cyndi, was that my patients would sound like little junkies. They would come in saying, I need a hit, I need a fix, withdrawal is hell, and they would always use this sort of drug vernacular, and I swear if you were just walking by, you'd think they were talking about cocaine or heroin or something. And, all of us who are experts would sort of laugh kind of, nervously, as it were, about this because we would say to ourselves, well, I wonder if there's anything to this. Could it be? And we knew deep in our hearts and souls that once these hyper-palatable foods, the refined, processed, sugary, fatty, salty combos started appearing on the horizon globally, that people started sounding like little junkies. And so I was always quite fascinated with this, and I've been following a lot of this literature and the emergence of this new science for the last 10 years. And then suddenly, over the last probably 4 years, we've had a kind of a mountain effect. We've had a tipping point of research that has really shown that there are profound changes that are taking place in the brain's reward center, where when you have foods, especially the refined sugary foods, in vulnerable brains, not everyone's, but in vulnerable brains, turns out there are organic changes that take place in that brain over time that are indicative of every addictive food process, not just sugar, but every. So when you look at the brain scans and you put them side by side, whether you're, a methamphetamine addict, a coke head, or an alcoholic, and then you put someone who is credentialed by the Yale Food Addict Scale right next to them, you look at the reward centers, they are indistinguishable. There's no difference when you're comparing them to, say, a normal person who, in this case, the normal would be non-addicted. And so that's a real mind-boggler. It's like, oh my gosh, what's that about? And so I've been following that, and that's why I wrote The Hunger Fix, which is the first consumer book describing this very science. And what goes on inside the brain, and then obviously what we can do about it.
So for many people who, are not addicted to food, they eat for fuel as opposed to eating for any other reason, they don't get it. They say, just don't put that food in your mouth. But it's not that simple, is it, when you're talking about addiction to these foods?
Well, there's a wide spectrum of issues that go along with this. So it's not just like everyone's the same. When it comes to something like alcoholism, or if you're addicted to cocaine or heroin, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus, It's a black and white situation. There's no playing around here. Whereas when it comes to food, there's a wide, spectrum of how this manifests itself. And some people have quite a problem. They tend to be people who have a history of other addiction in their life as well. They may be former smokers. They may be people who have inherited genetic addictive tendencies from parents and grandparents, who were alcoholics, drug addicts, or cigarette smokers, or all the rest of it. And so, you have other people who really don't have that kind of issue. They just picked it up by the way they were raised. So there's no strong genetic issue, but there is what we call an epigenetic issue, meaning that your environment influenced what was going on in your reward center. Now, when you say, oh, for crying out loud, just put that down and you should just be able to eat one cookie, not 35 of them, and back and forth, well, would it be that easy? Everyone's brain is different. And some people are just hardwired to be exquisitely sensitive to these kinds of food-like products, because most of them are just processed junk. And so when that happens, they have a hypersensitive reaction in the reward center versus those people who can just have a cookie and walk away. And so you can't compare apples to oranges here. You've got very different histories, very different brains that are either primed or not primed to cave to the crave. And that's why you have to honor everyone's uniqueness. There's also one other layer here, Cyndi, that's very important. It's not just the reward center in the brain that's affected when you have addictive-like tendencies. Instead, it's also the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain right behind your forehead. If you tap your forehead, it's right behind there. And I kind of call it the smarty pants part of the brain. It's the part that is the CEO, the command central for the entire brain. It helps you rein in impulsivity. It helps you plan, strategize, be mindful, vigilant, pay attention, stay in the present, be organized, all right? So that part of the brain is absolutely essential. Now, what we found is during the full-on addictive-like state, when you just can't have one and you're binging and on, and this is also true for all addictive states, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or, the refined foods. What we found is that this smarty pants part of the brain is impaired. It's impaired. And we see this on special brain scans that show how that part of the brain metabolizes glucose or sugar. We find that it's grossly impaired. So that if you walk up to someone and you say, oh, for crying out loud, why don't you just, show better willpower what's wrong with you? Well, when you walk up to someone with an impaired prefrontal cortex and you tell them to do that, that's very much like telling someone with 2 broken legs to run a 5K. It's not going to happen. And they're, until they are able to, get off the stuff, clean it up, mentally, nutritionally, physically, spiritually, until they're able to clean that up and strengthen that smarty pants part of the brain, then you cannot ask them by any means to be making an appropriate choice. And that's the issue here. So you actually have organic changes involved here, and that's the answer.
So what I've got so far is that we're looking at several layers. So we're looking at perhaps a genetic predisposition, and then the epigenetics and the lifestyle that triggers those, the hypersensitivity and the prefrontal cortex being impaired. So is it food that is causing the prefrontal cortex to be impaired? And is it like a muscle that, the more you become mindful and get your strength and do everything right, the stronger it gets? Will it be repaired?
Absolutely. See, that's the good news. Boy, I'd never do an interview if I had nothing but bad news. It'd be kind of a bummer. Instead, there's no question that we have watched that, for instance, when you do meditation, right, a number of things are taking place. One of the first things that happens during meditation in people who have been meditating for quite some time. So these are people who haven't just sort of like meditated once a month, but they've been at it. It's sort of like when you want to learn how to run a 5K, you can't learn to do that by running once a month. It's not going to happen. You've got to be running on a fairly regular basis, 3 times a week, whatever. But you've got to be able to do it. Well, the same thing goes with meditation. So when you do meditation, guess what happens? And this is especially true in transcendental meditation, which is TM. We've seen this in mindfulness meditation. What happens is the circulation to that smarty pants part of the brain during meditation actually increases. And we actually also watch activation of the prefrontal cortex during meditation. Now, that's extraordinary. I mean, how can that possibly happen, right? Well, as it turns out, it happens because you're tapping into deep reservoirs of mindfulness, vigilance, and you're kind of in a state of restful alertness. Now, if that's not enough to convince you, then how about this? We have found that in mindfulness meditation, we've done epigenetic research to find out that the genes that control, say, for instance, inflammation throughout the body, and we don't want inflammation. We want everything all nice and calm in the body, because inflammation is the basis for problems like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. So when we tap into and look at those specific genes responsible for inflammation, and we watch what happens pre and post meditation, guess what? We notice that those genes have a different, what we call gene expression or messaging to the rest of the body after meditation. meaning that during meditation, you are actually changing what these genes say to the rest of the body. Now, if that isn't cool, I mean, just give it up right now, which means that you're getting an incredible payback. And then the final coup de grace, when you practice mindful living, when you practice being present and centered, then you actually change gene expression in the brain such that you are able to carve and create new neural circuitry in the brain to supervene over the addictive impulses, so that now mindfulness is predominant, and over the course of time, the screaming, raging, food-addicted voices that you hear in your head become more of a whisper. They never go away 100%. They become, hopefully one day, in almost an inaudible whisper. But there's always that presence. It's just that you can now be more strong and powerful. And you can now make the right choices because your brain has been able to adapt because you've helped it through mindful living and meditation. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, it's wonderful. Like, I've been reading quite a bit on behavioral epigenetics, but I hadn't heard it. You know, I had heard about it in the way you think, but you're saying when you get into that meditation. So my question to you is that, you know, there's so much meditation out there, and there's so many people that are doing tapes and audios and things like that. What do you do this in your work? Is it can we find it on your website?
Okay, so, you know, there are multiple kinds of meditation, right? I personally am, you know, a fan of both transcendental meditation and mindfulness. And if people want to learn more about this, I actually have a great video on my website, which is Dr. Peeke, DRPEEKE.com, and you'll see me do my thing talking about meditation and the science behind all of this, including epigenetics. And I did this as sort of a TED Talk, which is very, very neat. And I bring this up also in a multitude of other venues on my website as well. So that being said, the other place you can learn more about, say, for instance, transcendental meditation is just go to tm.org. ORG, and then you can also find a teacher, because with TM you have to have a teacher. You can't just sort of, you know, learn this off some CD or something. Mindfulness has other options. You can learn this through a variety of different avenues. I'm a big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is probably one of the great names in mindfulness. He's probably one of the most famous of the Buddhist monks who has popularized this through about 70 different books. There is a great primer he writes, which is The Miracle of Mindfulness. Again, that's Thich Nhat Hanh. That's Thich, not Nhat, Hanh, H-A-N-H. He also wrote Pieces Every Step and a number of others, and just beautiful stuff. I mean, I really think that, you know, there are lots of resources to learn how to do this. What we're really trying to do when we look at this relationship between food and addiction is to really, you know, draw back now and say, how can I help myself? How do I know I have such an issue? And what can I do to be able to work with myself on this? Well, the first thing you want to do is realize we actually have a tool now. I mentioned it earlier, the Yale Food Addict Scale. And this has been something Yale University here in the United States credentialed, peer-reviewed, has already been published. And we use this as a tool. The Harvard Nurses Study is now using this in a big, study that they're doing on the relationship between food and addiction among the, 80,000 nurses that they're looking at. So if anyone wants to take a very quick test, you just go to my website, and that's drpeeke.com, and just go where it says food addiction on the home page. Click on that, and the first thing you'll see is, are you a food addict? And then you just want to click on that, and there's a quick JavaScript test that it shouldn't take you more than, 2 minutes, if that. And it'll give you a quick swipe. The longer version and the shorter version are also in my book, in my e-book, which is The Hunger Fix.
Yeah, there's not just about the meditation and then knowing you're a food addict. And I think most of these people know that they are. And I've seen, the extremes of it where, a young girl can't, she's in love with her food. She looks like she's actually kissing her food as she eats it, and she won't take that time, male and female, it's not just women, but they won't take that time, and they can't get out of that hole, and they won't meditate, and they won't listen to their parents, and they're making blame. What do we do when we look at, we've got somebody like that? Where's our first starting point, even when they don't even want to help themselves, but you as a mother, you are just being crushed by what is happening?
Well, one of the reasons why a lot of this happens, there's so many things that go on, is that many children and preteens and teens, and then obviously well into adulthood, these subsectors of the population use food to soothe themselves. It's comforting and soothing to them because something is happening around them that they need to, as it were, anesthetize oftentimes, because it's confusing, it's troubling, it's challenging, and they find themselves needing to soothe themselves without even fully realizing it. And therefore they place way more emphasis on food and its ability to make them feel good than, as it were, a non-addictive person would. So, for instance, we see this a lot in troubled families. We see this a lot where, even in not in troubled families, where a child may be just super sensitive and they see themselves as maybe the middle child, and they feel abandoned and not and feeling as though people aren't paying enough attention to them. They may have issues at school. They may have body image issues where they don't feel as though they're measuring up to their peers. There are just countless things that occur for a child, a preteen, or teen, because those are very precarious years. Here's the important thing. During that time, remember the smarty pants part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex? Well, in young people, it's not as well developed. It doesn't reach full maturation until the end of the teens, until about age 20, 21. Meaning that if you're asking a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old to, reach deeply into a level of maturity to make the right choice, good luck with that, because many of them do not have the assets, as it were, to be able to pull that off. They just don't. It just doesn't work for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So another question that I have is that a lot of people feel helpless, hopeless, and defeated. And so how do they get out of that emotion? And now we're talking about adults that know exactly where they are, and they're in that helpless, hopeless, defeated state.
Right. Well, those are the three musketeers that I always talk about. Helpless, hopeless, defeated, because they all like to hang out together. Well, Here's the deal. The good news is we know how to help you, with this. I usually use a program of mind, mouth, and muscle. I like the M's. This way, somehow the older you get in life, the more you alliterate, just so you can remember everything. So mind, mouth, and muscle is easy to remember. So, if we look at that then, I like looking at it in a holistic, integrative approach. The first thing you got to realize is that in order to help yourself, it would be very nice to, at least for the time being, sidebar, just put aside those kinds of food products that really seem to be troublesome. So if every single time you're around candy bars, you lose it, well, guess what? The last thing you want sitting around your house are a bunch of candy bars. Now, there are those people who say, well, why don't you just restructure your relationship with that candy bar, keep it in the house, and just, no problem at all, just learn to have one. Well, yeah, that works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. The grand majority of people actually feel a great deal of relief not having this stuff around. Why? Because it reignites the reward center. So why do you want to keep doing that to yourself? Why don't you just put it aside for the time being, and at some time later down the pike, whenever, you can revisit that and say, is it really worth it? Is it truly worth it? And that's very important to ask. Is it really worth it? And if the answer is no, then why do you want to revisit it all? I mean, there is life after, not having that particular candy bar. I mean, there's plenty of other things to have. And so that's an important thing. And then you've got to create, a culture of support around you. And that means the people who you are living with, working with, everyone in your, immediate living kind of, sphere, get them on board to support you so that you don't have people who are enabling and running you into problems with, maybe inadvertent sabotage. Who the hell knows? You just need to be able to create an environment within which you can pull this off, meaning having foods that you feel comfortable with but will not binge on, that you don't feel impulsively wanting to overeat on a routine basis. And then you've got to start practicing every single day from mind, mouth, and muscle, meaning that once you start eating more whole foods, and this is, protein and fiber together kill carb cravings, so you're going to have whole foods. You're going to have regular physical activity. Notice I did not use the E word, exercise. I said physical activity. Get up, assume the vertical, and walk. I mean, as a beautiful, easy, simple start. And then at the same time, live more mindfully in the present and be more mindful of those moments, those triggers, those cues that kick you into that urge to want to cave to the crave. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I remember listening to you speaking one time, and you were talking about this culture of support and how our peers and our family and friends can help us. But you know what? Addicts can be very devious, and they still go to petrol stations, and they still go to the grocery store. And I would love you to tell everybody that whole thing that you talk about between, when you give up cocaine versus when you give up sugar. And how we've been bombarded. Yeah, I love it. If you could talk about that. And you're spot on, Cyndi. So, what I found was that if you want to give up cocaine, then it's pretty straightforward. You're either on the wagon or you're off. Black and white. You're either, doing coke or you're not. I'm not going to put you on a moderate diet of cocaine. That's just not going to work. I can't say, well, just have a little bit at lunch and, don't have anything in the mid-afternoon. How ludicrous is that, right? Now, when I wake up in the morning, okay, and I want to, get off cocaine, then I have certain very simple, straightforward things I do. I get rid of every one of my loser friends, who are cocaine addicts, because I can't deal with that. You're out of here. I can even move physically. I go bye-bye. I'm like, I'm going to move to a different city away from all my loser friends who are cocaine addicts, right? And then I can, find a brand new life to live. And away from all this, I'm not going to spend my money on cocaine, save all my money, etc.
All right, well, that's all real special and everything. Now, when I leave in the morning, okay, and I want to go to work, do I see billboards with big signs that say, hey, it's time to do a line of Coke? And then they have a nice big table with someone doing a line of Coke. Time to do your line of Coke. Wow, doing lines of Coke are so wonderful. I mean, how crazy is that? When's the last time I saw a billboard with that? How about never? When you go into a grocery store, is there a special aisle in the grocery store that says cocaine here? Bring it on. We got everything for you. All right, so what am I trying to say? When you're trying to give up something like a drug of abuse, or, a substance of abuse, like, alcohol or whatever, again, it's black and white. You're in and out. And then when you leave, and go and live your life in the real world, you see very few, if anything, other than like, in the movies or something, any cues to do cocaine. You just don't see the cues. Alcohol is a tricky one because that's a little bit more like food because you see a lot of, billboards and stuff. But nothing matches the cues and triggers that you will see for food. This is why when people say when you're coming off cocaine, it's like taking the dragon, the demon, the beast, and you take that beast and you lock it up in a lead-lined box, and you lock it up, take the key, and throw it away. We're done. We don't want to see the beast anymore. But when you have to eat, what do? How can I honestly tell you that, you're not going to be cued or triggered? Because you are on a moment-by-moment basis. Just get onto the Internet, watch television, magazines. I could go on. You get the point. Radio, everything. So everywhere you go, you are cued and triggered to overeat, to overconsume food, and then guess what? Funny how it's never tuna on a bed of greens that they're advertising out there. It's always the sugary, fatty, salty stuff. And when you see it daily, day in, day out, then that means that you've got to go back to that, demon that sits in there, in that lead-lined box. And you actually, in order to eat your breakfast and all the rest of it, you got to let the demon out 3 times a day. And maybe, for your snack 4 times a day. And you have to deal with the demon, because the demon's going to be yelling and screaming in your ear, don't eat that apple, have a Twinkie instead, eat that candy bar, eat that whatever. Now, there's nothing wrong inherently with a candy bar. You're not going to die. However, for vulnerable brains, there's everything wrong with it because it's guaranteed to go ahead and cue you into a binge if you fall for that, craving. So that's why the issue with food and addiction is so terribly complex and much more difficult to manage because every day, 24/7, you've got to continuously stay vigilant.
It's so hard, and I see so many people going through this, and they do really well, and they stick to the principles, and they do exactly what you're saying, and then they fall again. Can you be addicted? Can the yo-yo dieter be addicted to the yo-yo dieting, or like they get on the wagon? Is there like a chemical addiction to that type of thing where they lose weight, they feel good, they get off the sugar, and then they go back to it again? It's almost like they have an addiction to that.
Well, you're on to something interesting, and that's the whole issue of, kind of getting hooked on things, all right? Meaning that, we have to see how we're using this word addiction. What it is you become habituated. You become used to, certain patterns. And I think that occurs in a lot of people. But if you look at someone who's had a real issue with compulsive eating and binging and overeating and really, having a number of trigger foods that really get them going. Now, we take someone like that, and then, we have them take on a very healthy lifestyle, okay? Exercising, meditating, doing the whole thing. And then when you say they, as it were, fall off the wagon and they're back at it again, I don't know that it's that they're really looking forward to another yo-yo diet or something. I think instead, if you go back to what incited that in the first place, that you're going to find, in other words, that relapse for all intent and purposes, you're going to find that there was something going on, with regard to trauma, with regard to some kind of stress in their life, because the people who are most vulnerable to utilizing food to self-soothe themselves, and to self-comfort, are those people who also have some difficulty adapting and adjusting to life stress without knee-jerking into some form of self-destruction. That is actually the Achilles heel of everyone who has an addictive-like behavior. Therefore, I would challenge and go back to that person and say, what was going on at that time in your life? And oftentimes you'll hear things like this, well, I dropped 30 pounds, I feel so much better, exercising, whatever, but I still have a rotten relationship with my husband. Okay? Well, what did you expect was going to happen after 30 pounds? That nirvana was going to hit? What you have to say to yourself then is that, what were your expectations? The greatest stresses of life come from unmet expectations. That's one of my Peekisms. And so you have to ask yourself, did you really think that all of a sudden someone would flip a switch and your whole relationship would just be, basso kino when you drop 30 pounds? Did you really think that? And when it didn't happen, you felt, guess what? Helpless, hopeless, and defeated. And when you felt that, what do? Well, you default back to the same self-destructive behaviors you did in the past, unless you've learned to be smarter, meaning that you've been meditating, so now you'll default to that instead of self-soothing with the sugary, fatty, salty, hyperpalatable foods. But I'll put money on it. Every single time, it's because of some stress that knee-jerks you right into helpless, hopeless, and defeated, and then it starts a domino effect. And once you feel that, then you default back into the original, overeating in the first place.
Look, can we talk about more than just sugar here? Because I know that there are foods that create a morphine-type state in our body. Like I was reading William Davis's book, Wheat Valley, and he talks about glutenomorphin, and apparently dairy has a type of morphine in there as well. And if you have a look at what we eat on a daily basis, we're eating wheat and dairy all the time. It's like we wake up in the morning, we have milk on our breakfast cereal, and then we may have a muffin with a bit of butter on it, and then we have a cheese sandwich, and then we might have crackers and cheese for afternoon tea, and then for dinner we might have our pasta with a white sauce. So these are also, I'm asking you, actually not saying it, are these also contributing to the obesity problem that we have, the reason why we can't lose weight and we keep gaining it back because we're told we should be eating the low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet? So
we're not really, that whole issue of low-fat carbohydrate, and the high carbohydrate diet is not true anymore. What we're now doing is actually customizing dietary intake. I personally, for instance, look very closely at someone's background. And I look at their family history, their personal history of everything from heart disease to diabetes to cancer. And then I look at what they're actually taking in, what they're having difficulty with, and in terms of which of the macronutrients, what kinds of foods. And so it totally, absolutely depends. I like to individualize. So really, if you look in the Hunger Fix Body for Life for Women, the other books I've written. What I really love to see is this kind of a ratio, closer to 30% fat, if not 35%, 30 to 35% fat, obviously the healthier fats like avocado and nuts and things like that, and olive oil. And then for protein, about 30% for sure. And so that only leaves you anywhere between 35 to 40% carbohydrate. And of that carbohydrate, I highly prioritize vegetables as the number one, and especially the non-starchy vegetables, the greens and things like this. And then secondarily, some fruit, and then the tertiary part of carbohydrates are grains, and I'm looking at quinoa and barley and things that are much more healthy than slapping on a bunch of bread and whatever. So this is why when in the Wheat Belly and Grain Brain and all the rest of these books that really look at this, I think it's really important to remember that people are different. And that what bothers one person may be a moot point for the next. For instance, for myself, I don't really care about bread. I mean, bread doesn't do much of anything for me. So I almost never have bread on a daily basis. For that matter, any bread I ever have is high quality, meaning it's very multigrain, and it's organic, and it's also something I have only on an occasional basis. I could care less about bread. Doesn't mean anything to me. Whereas I have other people who die for bread. They just, put, tons and tons of junk on it, butter and everything else, and they'll run through half a loaf or a loaf of bread. They don't care. They just love the stuff. So, that's why I say you can't be global about this. You got to be very careful. When it comes to gluten, I think it's become very clear that a lot of people just feel better lowering the total gluten, if not eliminating gluten in their life. I say if that works for you, great. But don't be expecting to drop a boatload of weight just because you happen to be, off gluten. Because there are plenty of gluten-free substitutes that are packed with calories. So, be very careful about that. It's just like a lot of people think vegetarians are little skinny people running around, and there are plenty of obese and overweight vegetarians because those, if you're someone who still takes in dairy and all the rest of it. And when it comes to dairy, again, it's the same issue. On a very individualized basis, is that working for you? One of my patients only uses a little bit of skim milk in her coffee every day, and then she'll put a very small amount in a smoothie that she makes every day, and that's all she does. And she's fine. She's not running around, diseased and, demented and out of her mind. She just has a little... So every person is different. I really feel that. And a little bit of balance is perfectly fine. And I think that, reining in total caloric intake, assuming you're not an athlete, obviously, is very important. We eat too much. We just, that's toxic in and of itself. And if we have addictive-like eating behaviors, and there are certain foods that cue and trigger that overeating, then you start a domino effect of overeating, packing on extra pounds, increasing inflammation throughout the body, and increasing your disease risk for heart disease, diabetes, and cancer.
To me, you're a thought leader, Dr. Peeke, and, there aren't many doctors that are thinking this way, and they're still, telling people to do the old pyramid or the food plate as it is here in Australia at the moment, and in the US, I believe. So, how do we change this? How do we get to the masses to help them understand that what we've been told may not be what is exactly right for us, and that it is an individual pursuit. And that's what's so frustrating, is that I listen to you and I go, why aren't there more like you out there telling their clients that food has something to do with their health? But most people come to me and they say, oh, I have such and such a disease, and my doctor said that it's got nothing to do with the food that I eat.
Well, that's, makes me crazy. It drives me crazy, and it's a short drive at that. Because, to be perfectly blunt with you, I wish I could clone myself. There are, thought leaders out there. They're just not enough. And, it's through this webinar, and it's through the messaging we're doing with all of the work that we do, for large audiences out there, that we're getting the message out. I'm an oddity in the United States. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but the grand majority of physicians in the United States have absolutely no training in nutrition. None. Zero. Not even an hour. Whatever a physician may know about it is something they probably read in a magazine somewhere. What I did was, after my formal training, I went back into academia under what we call the Pew Scholarship, and I became a scholar in nutrition and metabolism, but only because I went out and I did that separately outside of my traditional training, and therefore became an academic in this. Well, that's ridiculous. I personally feel that nutrition should be an integral piece of the curriculum, as well as physical activity. You're asking physicians to write prescriptions for physical activity. Really? Many of them don't exercise to start with, so you can't talk about something you don't do. Now, the good news is the younger ones coming through are getting better and better at it. But I'll tell you, it's been a hard haul here. Whereas with nutrition, that is biochemistry, Cyndi. This is a very tough subject. You've got to know what you're talking about. You have to know the science, which means that you had to have taken some formal coursework and been tested on it. But that still does not exist in the United States. So I teach in the medical school, and every time I teach, it's standing room only. And guess who's standing in there, too? The faculty, because they need to know it, too. It's not just the students. So, we're slowly but surely getting the point out there. I just wish it would go faster, that's all.
Yeah, that makes my heart sing. We have very few doctors here that are talking about nutrition. And look, I've met a beautiful young intern. She's just been out 3 months and she's at the local hospital. And I said to her, how much training do you do in nutrition? And she put her eyes in the air and she went, I think I did a little in gastro in first year. And I was floored because I thought, surely it's changing, surely there's this momentum happening, and the institution of medicine is realizing that where it's going is that we have to look at the food that people are eating, because this is what's making us sick, and this is what's causing the food addictions and everything like that. What I would like to do is just, for our last 10 minutes that we've got here, I would really love to ask you a question that I don't understand, and I'm hoping you may be able to help me with the relationship, and everybody's talking about it at the moment, the relationship between the hormones for hunger, such as the ghrelin and the leptin, and can you explain that whole relationship that's happening there? And because everyone seems to be making a point about it, and I'm hoping you can clarify it.
Well, I do too. When I wrote the Hunger Fix, I made a big point of really trying to get people to understand that there's this beautiful choreography that the body has all set up to be able to help us with the issue of appetite and hunger. All right, so how does it all start? Number one, leptin is a hormone that's secreted right around the fat cells throughout the body. So it's sort of like, it's a little BFF thing. It's a best friend. It kind of hangs out with, fat cells. Now, what's its main job in life? Its main job in life is to communicate to the brain, how well the fuel supply is looking. Think of it like the dashboard, that fuel gauge in your car. It says, oh, look, I have a lot of fuel. Oops, I don't have enough fuel. Okay? Yeah. So leptin will always look at those fat cells. And let's just say, for instance, I have not eaten for 6 hours. Now I'm really drawing on my fat cells, and the fat amount is dropping now because I'm using it now to be able to get around and do my thing, and it's been too long since I ate. So now leptin is going to cue the brain. It'll say, uh-oh, fuel supply is low, right? So you better incite hunger. So then the brain, that's the hypothalamus of the brain, that's the command central up there, way up there. All right, so that part of the brain then communicates with the stomach. Now, how does it do that? Well, down in the stomach, in, the curvature of the stomach, is where another hormone hangs out. It's called ghrelin. And ghrelin is one of the most powerful stimulants to appetite on the planet. This hormone, when it's stimulated, honey, nothing's going to stop it. You are going to start foraging for food, whether you like it or not. So, if I'm starving, if I'm out somewhere, on a desert island or something, this is a beautiful mechanism to be able to help me launch a lot of foraging for food. If I didn't feel hunger, then I'm not going to be looking for berries and, catching a fish or something just to stay alive. I'll just sit there like a, lump of coal. So it's a beautiful system. If you don't get enough sleep, the entire system falls apart. That's why when we shortchange ourselves on sleep, then when we try to wake up in the morning, after only 4 hours of sleep or even less, then we start eating everything that's not tacked down. Why? Because ghrelin and leptin are now impaired and dysfunctional. You have to have normal sleep, ideally 7 to 8 hours, in your system for ghrelin and for leptin to operate efficiently. That's it. End of story. Okay? So that's how that whole thing works. Another very powerful hormone in this whole thing is insulin. And insulin is very important in the storage and in the release of fat throughout the body. And insulin will, if you have too much, especially carbohydrate on board, then insulin levels rise. And next thing you know, you've got boatloads of extra fat storage going on. And if you're over the age of 40, a lot of that fat storage is happening deep inside your belly, which of course is causing, increased risk for heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. When I wrote The Hunger Fix, I made a big point of showing how all of these hormones dance together in the body and how they can become impaired by lifestyle choices like poor sleep, for instance, and another hormone, cortisol, for stress. When you walk around just totally stressed out all the time, this is also another issue that gets us into all kinds of trouble.
So I would say that everybody needs to get the Hunger Fix and really learn about what you're talking about. And one of the things you talk about are the three-stage, it's a three-stage thing. Could you just outline those 3 stages? Very
simple. And I'm talking about if you really want to start reining in your compulsive eating and all the rest of it, I need you to take whatever the trigger foods are and get them the heck out of your house. Just run from them. All right? At least in your home, that could be a safe haven. I can't guarantee what's going on out in the real world. All right. And then during detox, basically, for lack of a better term, you're learning to be able to now substitute healthy foods that are tasty, delicious. I have tons of recipes, food plans in the book that will help substitute and switch out for what you were doing before. At the same time, I'm going to get you up and walking. At the same time, I'm going to get you to become more mindful. We're going to do this day by day, little step by little step, but it's going to be huge progress. The second stage is beginner recovery. This is where you practice. Everything you learned in detox, now you're going to practice. And the detox phase is usually 4 to 6 weeks. And then we're off and running. And then after you've been practicing, making progress, you also can slip and slide all over the place, come back again, regroup. That's perfectly fine. But when you've reached about 80% of where you need to be, the binging is now pretty much under control, you're actually seeing a healthy change in your body, then you're ready to move to master recovery. And we all want to be masters, which means that the master is someone who just works hard every single day and is willing to just, continue to whack away, practice. You may fall, you stand up, you do it again and again, keep learning more valuable lessons and keep applying them. That's what the master does. And again, should you have a tough time and you need to regroup, you'd simply circle back to wherever it works for you to begin the regrouping process, whether it's detox or it's a beginner recovery. It's all the same. Just want it to work for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So just keep coming back to home base. And, a lot of people say, I've been on this protocol, I was doing so well, and then I went off it.
No, what happened was, go back to what I said. Yep. I guarantee you it was a stress that you could not figure out how to handle without soothing yourself with those foods again. And if you just get help with that, coaching, this is what I do, if you go to my website, you see I do coaching. I sit down, I help people walk through that. Another thing that you could do is, get help, a therapist, somebody out there who can kind of teach you some of the new tools you can use to be able to become much more effective at adapting and adjusting to life stresses without always defaulting to self-destruction.
Yeah. Well, let everybody know how to get to you and learn more about you and get that book. And it's available also electronically, isn't it? So we can get it straight away.
Oh my gosh, you can get it. You can get the book by ebook in a heartbeat, Amazon.com, all of that. You could just go to any one of those places where they have ebooks. Obviously, Amazon here is the big one. But it's the Hunger Fix. And my website is Dr. Peeke, DrPeeke.com. And there's a contact us form there. And if you want to ask me a specific question, do it there. Or go to my Facebook, for crying out loud. That's global. And like me on Facebook, please. And that is Dr. Pam Peeke, Peeke. You'll find me in a heartbeat, Dr. Pam Peeke. And then also follow me on Twitter with Pam Peeke MD. So, it's, or Peeke MD. It's so easy to be able to, contact me, stay with me. I really enjoy my Facebook interactions big time. And you can post a comment, you can post a question on my message board, and I'm more than happy to deal with you because it gives me nothing but pleasure to teach and to reach out and to touch you.
Well, what we've done is we have on the page that everybody's listening in, if they're listening on in the webinar, we've actually put links to everything for you. So they can find you really easy if they haven't written it down or they're in the car listening or whatever they're doing or how they're listening to you. We've put that on the link. So look, Dr. Peeke, thank you so much for your time. Look, I have enjoyed it, and I know many other people have enjoyed it, and I actually rang some people before I spoke to you and just asked them, what questions do you want me to ask Dr. Peeke, especially, friends that just cannot get off this. So hopefully, well, I think you've answered. I just think what you talk about is just brilliant. And next month we will be talking to Dr. Jack Cruz, a neurosurgeon who has created a blog specializing in leptin sensitivity, which Dr. Peeke has been talking about, and cold thermogenesis. Dr. Jack Cruz is a mentor of mine, as is Dr. Peeke, without her really knowing it. And he makes me think outside the square. He's my modern-day Einstein. Yeah. Make sure you register for next month's call. We will send out reminders. And thank you to everyone from around the world who has contributed to this call and been on the line to hear this incredible wisdom of Dr. Pam Peeke. And thank you for taking the time out of your day and night to improve your knowledge on health and well-being in order to change your life and that of your families, friends, community, state, and country. We all have a part to play in this change, so be part of the ripple effect that is changing the world.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.